We're going to start the third chapter of Bava Metzia. And we're going to find that the Mishnah is circling around different categories of liability. And we need to have in our minds three really important categories. There's an unpaid custodian. So you're going on holiday, you leave your bike with your neighbor. He has the least liability. You're not employing him as a guard. You just leave the bike with him. He has the least liability. And then there's the category of a paid custodian, someone who's guarding the bike for you, or a renter, someone who rents your bike, and we'll see that they have some liability. And then finally, we'll touch on the borrower. Now, the borrower, Hashoel Chayav al Hakol. The borrower is actually responsible for anything. So we'll see that if anything happens to this object, the borrower is going to be liable. And we'll see the Mishnah play around with these categories. But before we get into the Mishnah, we need a couple of verses. And we're back to the Parsha of Mishpatim in Shemot. We're back to Exodus around chapters 22, 23, where all of these laws are discussed. Kiten ish el ra'ehu kesef or chelim lishmor. Someone deposits with his neighbor money or vessels to keep. Vegunav mi beta ish. It's stolen. He makes a deposit and it's stolen. Okay, if the thief is found, he's going to pay double. That's not problematic, but the Mishnah is interested in, because if the thief is found, it's obvious that the objects have been stolen. But if the thief is not found, then we don't really know what is happening here. What happened to these objects? The neighbor claims that they were stolen, but there's no evidence. So what are we going to do? The master of the house shall be brought. This word El Elohim here means to the judges. It's not a divine name. Brought to the judges. He's got to swear that he hasn't done anything with his neighbor's goods. So in other words, he has to swear an oath. In order to remove himself from liability, he has to swear an oath. Let's have a look at the Mishnah. So someone deposited an animal or utensils with his neighbor. And they were stolen or lost, i.e., they kind of went missing. This is really interesting. His fellow, i.e., the person who was keeping them, paid because he didn't want to take the oath. Taking an oath was a big thing in those days. It was a massive thing. And we've already seen that the rabbis are very reluctant to take an oath, and people were reluctant to take oaths. So someone might have just said, I don't want to go to court and swear an oath. I'll just pay. I'll just recompense you. That's what happens. Shilem v'lo ratzah hishaver. He just pays. He doesn't want to swear an oath. And we're going to now quote a saying of the sages elsewhere probably elsewhere in the Mishnah. Sheharei amru, because we've already taught shomer chinam nishba v'yotze. Someone who's an unpaid guardian can take an oath and can just be exempt. That's what they can do. They can take an oath and they can be exempt. So far, so good. Nimtza haganav. So the thief is found. So now we have proof the object is stolen. Mishalem tashlumei chefel. Well, the thief is going to pay double. Or tavachu machar mishalem tashlumei arba chamisha. If he's found, he pays twice. If he's slaughtered or sold, he pays 4 or 5 times. So we've learned these halachot. We know he pays 4 or 5 times. But the question is going to arise, Lemihu Mushalem, to whom does he pay? To whom does he pay? And the Mishnah answers, Lemi shehapigadon etzlo, to the person who had guarded the deposited object, as if by refusing to swear and paying, he'd somehow acquired the rights to any damages that might result in the future. By paying over, he somehow acquired the rights to future reclamation of the object. Nishba velorat salashalem. Let's say he took the oath and did not want to pay. That's would be a normal practice, I think. So the thief is found, he pays twice. If he's slaughtered or sold, he's got to pay 4 or 5 times. This is pretty familiar now. But to whom does he pay? Le'va'al hapikadon, to the owner of the object, the deposited object. The owner of the deposit object gets the 4 or 5 times or the twice. Let's make this a bit more complicated. Let's now, before we make it more complicated, let's look at another situation, which the sages interpret actually as not as an unpaid, but a paid custodian. Kitain ish el rahu chamor or shor or sebechol behema lishmor. So he's given his neighbor something to guard, and the sages interpret it as a paid relationship. And then the same thing happens. It dies, or it's hurt, or it's driven away. No one knows what's happened to it. Somehow these animals go missing. So we're a bit stricter here. Shvuat Hashem tiyeh bein shnehem. So he swears an oath. Im lo shelach yado b'melechet re'ehu. He swears an oath that he hasn't touched his neighbor's goods. And on swearing the oath, v'lakach ba'alav v'lo yishalem, ve'im ganov yiganev me'imo yishalem li v'alav. But if it's stolen from him, he makes restitution to the owner. So in other words, if this animal dies or gets hurt or gets lost or something, he can swear and make himself exempt. If it's stolen, he has to make restitution, as if the paid guard is actually responsible for theft. He's responsible for theft. And I guess the presumption must be that, theft is a reasonable eventuality which the paid guardian is expected to take care of. Whereas, some animal dying or breaking its foot, well, any animal can die breaking its foot, even when it's in the guardianship of the original owner. But if it's stolen, the guardian's responsible. So let's have a look at the Mishnah now. Someone rented a cow from his fellow. We've said, by the way, that the renter has the same level of liability as the paid guardian. So he's going to be liable for theft. Someone rented a cow from his fellow. And he lent it to somebody else. Umeta kadarka. And then it died of a natural death. It just died normally. Well, this is really interesting, isn't it? The renter is not reliable for an ordinary death, but the borrower is liable for everything. So what are we going to do? Yeshivas shemeta gadarka. So the renter is going to die. The renter is going to swear that it died a natural death. Yeah, someone who rented a cow and lent it on and it died, that person must swear it died a natural death. And then what happens? The borrower has to pay the renter. The borrower has to pay the renter because the borrower is liable, even though the renter is no longer liable. And so the renter seems to make a profit on this deal, and Rabbi Yossi is going to object. Amar Rabbi Yossi, how can this one kind of make a profit out of that one's cow? It just doesn't make sense. We cannot accept that. Eila tahzor hapara la ba'alim. The cow returns to the owner, i.e., the money returns to the owner. So we have what seems to be a legal quirk, and we're going to the Mishnah rejects it. The cow or the money from the cow returns to its owner.